face my biggest fears is when I have my biggest success. I studied a lot of experts. People ask about scaling before they've mastered growth. Getting paid for a skill set that you have. This is entrepreneurship.
How's it going, guys? Welcome to another episode of Secrets of Silent Success. Today we have the one and only Maya Elious. How are you doing this morning?
I am doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great, Happy to be in Atlanta, and I'm grateful for you joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Cool, so we can jump right into it?
Let's do it.
Awesome. So I seen a recent post on your social where you talked about people are looking to find a shortcut to success. And then you say like, hey, the work is the shortcut, right?
Yeah.
So my question for you is kind of, what's your origin story to really building that work ethic to get your success?
Well, I definitely feel like the work ethic was ingrained in me through my dad.
Okay.
Both of my parents, actually, I'm first generation American and they're from Liberia, West Africa. So just having that work ethic of, we need to work hard, aspiring to live the American dream. We need to be the best in everything that we do. Yeah. So fortunately, having that foundation of the work ethic, but then also establishing your own work ethic when you decide, what is it that I really want? What do I want to build? What's my vision? What's the type of impact that I want to have?
Sure, absolutely. No, I think I've heard in a couple other podcasts you mentioned being the first generation American. You talk about leaving school, right, and thinking about disappointing your parents. But I also seen another quote on your Instagram, right? I was combing through it, and you talked about not being paralyzed by fear. So I would want you to explain maybe a time where you did have fear, maybe it was leaving school, but you still persevered, and what tips, tricks, or ideas would you give to the audience on fighting through the fear?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely embraced a lot of fear in my journey, but I also recognize that every single time I face my biggest fears is when I have my biggest success. Yeah. So I would say scariest decision of my life, dropping out of school. Second scariest decision was transitioning from my design agency to coaching full time. Okay. And my advice would be to overcome the fear as fast as possible, because the longer you take to make the decision, the more space that you create for more doubt and fear to creep in. And you start overthinking and you start justifying why you're still staying stuck in a place. And so the faster you approach fear and overcome it, the faster you can find success and start doing what you really enjoy.
Yeah, and what would be your practical tip? I seen a meme, you can call it, on LinkedIn that was like, entrepreneurship is jumping off the cliff and building a parachute on the way down. Yeah. So for me, I wanted to start a podcast. I'm going to film an episode. I don't even know what I'm going to call it. I don't know. Yeah. I'm just going to actually just do something. What's your practical tip to going ahead and facing that fear?
Just doing it. I think sometimes we're looking for hacks and tips, and it's like, just do it.
Yeah.
Stop looking for tips and hacks. Just do it. Like, you don't need a 10-step play to overcome fear. You just need to overcome it.
Yeah, 100%. And I would like to tell people, whether it's like a public speech or whether it's talking to a boss, once I start doing the thing I was fearful of is when the fear leaves.
Exactly. Right. And you realize you made the fear bigger than it really was by letting it sit and fester in your mind. I think sometimes we nurture our fears, we feed our fears, so we are making it bigger than what it really is.
Absolutely. No, I love that. So transitioning a little bit to the business side of things, right? So you're the branding and marketing guru, strategist, started all the way back making MySpace, I was about to say Facebook, but even further back than that, started out making MySpace pages. Tell me, like, when did you realize, hey, this could be a business, this is something that I can monetize? Because I know my story, but I want to hear your story about when it kind of clicked for you.
Yeah, I think it's funny because when I started out, I didn't have an intention of being an entrepreneur, right? Yeah. And I don't think that was something that was instilled in me. It was like, go to school, get a good government job, get a good paying job, whatever it is. Yep. But once somebody offered me money, I was like, oh, this is so interesting. I thought it was like a secret. I'm like, do they know that I would have done this for free? And so I thought I found my own hack, like, wow, people are really paying me. So I think once I recognized that people would pay me, I'm like, okay, if one person pays me, will another person pay me? And that's really my strategy to growing. Like, I just need one person as evidence that it can happen. And I'm going to just keep going with that and keep growing. So that's when I understood, like, oh, this is entrepreneurship. getting paid for a skill set that you have.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I always tell people you're not a business owner until you get someone to pay you for what you do or what you've made, right? Outside of that, it's a hobby,
Yeah.
right? One of the things I thought was interesting about your journey and something that I'm learning a little bit, later on the pathway is you have your skills, whether you're creative, whether you're a photographer, and a lot of people focus on those creative skills and not on the marketing side of things, right?
Yes.
But I know you see it a little differently. So tell us how you scaled your business and what you were focusing on early on to grow and scale your agency.
I would say early on, I studied a lot of experts. And what I have recognized, especially being in the creative space, being friends with other graphic designers, friends with other photographers, videographers, is that they would focus more on their skill and their talent than they did on selling their skill or their talent. And I started to recognize, like, I ended up making more money because I studied marketing more than I did graphic design. And it's not to say that I didn't focus on my skill, but I found that balance. And I recognized that there was a level of entitlement with creatives where they thought they deserve to be paid for their talent. And what you'll see with a lot of creatives is they'll say, well, I deserve to be paid for my talent because of how good I am or how many years I've studied it. Or I deserve to be paid for my time because of, maybe if you're a photographer, you're like, I'm spending 3 hours shooting your photos and I'm spending another 2.5 hours editing it. Or they'll say I should be paid for my tools because my camera is expensive or my lens is expensive. And so what I've recognized with a lot of creatives is that they have this thought process and entitlement of I deserve to be paid for my talent, my time, or my tools. And what people actually pay for is the transformation. And so unless you can communicate and articulate how your talent, your time, and your tools can create a transformation, you're just going to be a really talented person that's not really impacting anybody.
Yeah, no, I agree with that 100%. Obviously, I know you're a coach and consultant, so we don't want to give all your tips and tricks, but I'm sure you encounter that over and over again with entrepreneurs that you work with. What are you telling them first? Is it change your mindset? Is it change your way? Like, what are you telling them to change to get to the right way of thinking when it comes to marketing and scaling a business?
It's not even that I'm necessarily telling them to change anything. As a coach, I ask a lot of questions where they can reveal the answers to me. And it's not so much about change, it's more so about revelation and them understanding what their value is and then learning how to articulate it. And I find that a lot of people don't know how to articulate their value because they're not clear on it. So when I'm having conversations with clients and they're telling me like, oh, I'm a life coach, I'm a health coach or whatever, and I'm asking, well, what is it that you hope to see for your clients? What are the type of results that you want to see for them? Tell me the last 5 people you've worked with that you really enjoyed working with. How is their life or their business or their finances, whatever it is, different now? And so once they start to see, oh, there's actual transformation in what I do, and it's not just about me, my ego, my skill, my expertise, and my degree, they realize I really am changing lives and I need to lead with that.
Gotcha. Yeah, so it's very flipping the mirror, if you will, and making it more customer centric, right? When you're telling creatives, coaches, trainers this information, what rebuttals do you get, or what like self-limiting beliefs that you get? Because I'm sure myself, listeners probably have those same things. Like, what rebuttals are you hearing when you say that?
I think probably the biggest rebuttal is just imposter syndrome around getting people results. Imposter syndrome around calling themselves experts. I hear that a lot. Like, well, I'm not really an expert. I've just been doing it 15 years. Like, don't play in my face. You're an expert. And don't play in your face. So I'm not an expert. I hear a lot of my clients say, well, I don't want to make any promises because I can't, I don't know if they'll get the results. And, when it comes to marketing and you're thinking about how you want to articulate your value, you do have to consider the promise of your offer. But the promise of your offer is not the guarantee. It's the intended result if they do the work. And of course, there always has to be some type of disclaimer. But if you look at, the past 15 clients that you've worked with, what promise can we create based on the trends of the results that you've had? So I think the biggest rebuttals are just a level of imposter syndrome. Can I really help people get these results that I say? And am I really an expert?
And I believe you talked a little bit about imposter syndrome. You say, hey, to kind of overcome that, focus on what you know, right? And for me, it's been a struggle to focus on one thing, right? Because I can do this, I can do that. Do you come across clients or people that you're helping and talking to with that same issue of wanting to focus on many things. What is your thoughts around find your niche and stay in that lane? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I find that people, they'll say, I'm just a creative and I can do all of these things. And the question that I ask is, what are you the absolute best at? Because when you're in that energy, you show up more confidently, you get people better results, you ask for money more confidently versus I'm mediocre at 10 things. And so it's really just a question of, do you want to be good at 10 things or do you want to be the absolute best? Do you want to be the top 1% at 1 to 2 things?
Yeah. And that's honestly, from my experience, when you can charge the prices that you want to charge, command the respect and everything in the marketplace. Thinking about pricing and business, scaling, right? Everybody wants to scale their business, right? And go lay on the beach somewhere, which that's a different podcast. But if I'll just use myself for an example, I'm a 6-figure entrepreneur. You're doing $30,000-$40,000 a month. What's the next step, or what do you tell people is the next step to really scale to get to become that 7-figure entrepreneur?
Yeah, I feel like I get this question often where people ask about scaling before they've mastered growth. And we use the terms growth and scaling interchangeably, but they are two different things. And growth is when you are at absolute capacity in your business, and most people don't get to a place where they are at absolute capacity. Typically, when people are at capacity, they might be like burnt out, and they're at capacity because they're charging too low of a rate. And so then you have to think, okay, how can I grow my revenue by simply charging more? And so you want to first get to a place where you are at capacity, like, okay, my calendar is filled out. I'm set with the price points that I want. There's nothing else that I could change that could allow me to grow anymore. And then you're like, okay, now I need to scale by either going from 1 to many or by hiring other people who can provide this service or introducing another layer with like products. And so first you have to say, am I at absolute capacity? And if I am, then what are some ways that I can introduce new levels of access or new ways to introduce more revenue without it costing me more time? That's what scalability is about. More revenue, more profit without costing you more time.
Yeah. No, I love those two definitions. Growth and scaling are two different things. I'm gonna use that if you don't mind, because that's great. To transition a little bit from kind of the advice and the tips and tricks that you would give to a client, I want to talk a little bit about your transition from the agency to going into the coaching consulting full time. What was the driving force behind that change? Because I know for me, if you got the money coming in, it's very comfortable, right? You've been doing this so many years. How do you get out of that comfort zone, do something new in the midst of that unsure of what's on the other side?
So anytime that I make a pivot in my business, I consider 3 things. I consider, does this bring me joy and fulfillment? Does this create impact? And does this create income? Those are the 3 things that I look at. And so anytime that I've transitioned in my business, grown in my business, I take a look at, is there a way for me to impact people at a higher level? And so when I first started in web and graphic design, I was creating Myspace pages and it worked for me at the time. I was making okay money. I was 18, 19 years old. I only needed to make $500 a month to be happy. Then I started to recognize like, okay, people are building their platforms on their Myspace, but now they're discovering having their own websites. So I'm like, a higher level of impact for my clients is them having their own websites. So I transitioned into being a web and graphic designer, which, by the way, when I told somebody I was a web designer, I totally wasn't. I just knew how to code Myspace pages, but I just knew like that's the next evolution of where you need to go. So I transitioned to that one because it was going to create a deeper level of impact and more money. Then when I transitioned from web and graphic design to then coaching and education and digital products, I recognized that my clients had these websites, they had these online platforms, but they didn't know how to market them. They didn't know how to get customers. They didn't know how to drive traffic to it. And so because I was getting so much better at marketing myself and content marketing as a blogger, I said the next level of impact where I can better help my clients is not just creating websites, but teaching them how to market themselves better online once they already have a website. So every single time I make a shift, I say, what's the next level of impact that I can have? And typically when you follow the impact, the money is going to come.
Yeah, I love that, because what I've seen in myself and with others is transition happens because it's a new shiny object over there,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
And not like, hey, this is more fulfillment, more impact, and more income, right? I think I
Yes.
said those three, right?
Yep,
And more
yep.
income. Thinking about income, when I started this podcast, I was really focused on talking about entrepreneurship and business. And I quickly realized you can't talk about those two things without talking about income. And a lot of the audience gravitated towards income. So I always like to try to throw in some type of financial literacy or some type of financial topic. So one of the questions I would have for you is, if you're talking to a new entrepreneur or someone who's transitioning from 9 to 5 into their coaching, consulting business, what are some of your financial wisdom and advice? Because I always tell people, 1 month you can make 30,000, next month you can make 3,000. So
Yeah.
you live your life, are you going to make 30,000 every
Yeah.
month? It may be tough for you, but what type of advice and wisdom are you sharing with others?
Yeah, I mean, I think really just understanding how much your lifestyle actually costs, because this is advice I would give to my clients, teaching them how to have launches, but their revenue might not be the same month after month, right? So if a client of mine could have a $60,000 launch, but then like you said, the next month could be 10,000, which $70,000 in a 2-month time span is still great. But what I teach them is thinking, okay, you have this revenue and you have your reserves, but you need to consider how much does it cost to run the business? How much do you need to be paying yourself? And stick within that budget. So if you know that your lifestyle and your business as a whole will cost you $12,000 a month, even when you have that $60,000 launch, you know that, okay, this $60,000 gives me 4 to 5 months of free space to serve my clients, market myself, have slower months because you've created those reserves.
Got you. And then I would also ask the biggest mistake you may have seen in others from a financial perspective as entrepreneurs.
Honestly, I actually think one of the biggest mistakes is trying to hoard our money. I see there's so many instances where people have the opportunity to go deeper in their business, typically through coaching, hiring, and they're going based on, well, this is the cash that I have on hand, or I don't have enough money. And I'm like, go into debt, get a loan, get business credit, do whatever you have to do, get a credit card, because you're going to have to make these investments. And what I think people aren't considering is that you're making these moves with the intention of making this money back. Why would you be afraid to go in debt for a short period of time to be able to get the ROI 2 times over, 5 times over, 10 times over? Yeah. So I would honestly say that's probably one of the biggest mistakes. People are sleeping on their own greatness. People are sleeping on future potential growth and scalability because they want to hoard the money that they have now.
Yeah. And I know from listening to another podcast you were on, I think you talked about when you got coaching for the first time, you only had like the deposit or something, right?
Oh yeah,
and
I
you
just had the deposit.
And so what is your mindset like, hey, I'm investing in myself that I'm gonna make the money back? Like, what's your mindset to say like, hey, I'm gonna just pay for it and figure it out?
Yeah, I really have this, I'm gonna figure it out attitude. Like, I've made it this far, right? What's the worst that can happen? I think I have two perspectives. Recently, I've been reading the book 10X is Easier Than 2X by Dan Sullivan and Ben Hardy. And one of the concepts that they have in there is called the gap and the gain, where he talks about many people live in the gap, some people live in the gain. And living in the gap is looking at how far away you are from this ideal future that you want, but living in the gain is taking a look at how far you've come. And living in the gain is you're consistently seeing the evidence of what you've been able to accomplish. And so I try my best to live in the gain. Obviously, I have days where I'm living in the gap and I'm like, I could be further along, right? This is the mentality a lot of us have. But there are many instances where it's like, I've done this before. I've gotten clients before. I've invested before. I've launched before. I failed before and I've overcome it before. And so just having this mindset of like, I'm gonna win. I have evidence of me winning. So I think that's the first perspective. And I think the second perspective is I am investing in myself. And I think many times people will say like, oh, I'm investing in this coach. And it's like, no, you're investing in yourself through that coach. Yeah. And it's important to have that distinction because sometimes it's possible to have a level of entitlement or to shift accountability when we think we're investing in the coach versus thinking we're investing in ourselves.
100%. Yeah, I was listening to Alex Hormozy and he talks about no matter who the coach is, I can glean something from them. It's not their responsibility to get me the result. It's my responsibility. Right. You need to have that mindset shift. One of the things I will ask is you talk about some days you're in the gap, some days you're in the gain. I'll see, you'll say like, hey, you know, the month of July, the gym didn't see me, but like the month of August, the gym gonna see me, right? I always tell people, just for me, it's impossible to be consistently consistent because you're human, right? Things are gonna happen, right? It's impossible to be consistently consistent. But I feel that what's important is getting back on the consistent train
Right.
when you fall off.
Yeah.
I would ask you, what's kind of your personal motto for staying consistent? Because in business and entrepreneurship, I believe that that is the key metric.
I think it's not overthinking it and not beating yourself up. Because it's possible to then get back consistent, but then when you're in the space where you should be focused on what's next, you're back to myself, or when I get back to my routine, it's just kind of like, okay, we're back in the game, we're focused on what's next, versus I need to be doing this because of how I fell off and I'm feeling bad or feeling guilty. So it's more so just staying focused on what really matters, staying focused on the vision versus staying stuck in the past based off of you just being human.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that. So this is called the Secrets of Silent Success podcast. I would ask you, Maya, what is your secret to success?
The secret to success. It's interesting because I don't think that success is a secret. I think that success leaves clues. I would say that you should study people who are living a life that you would want to emulate and look at their strategies and figure out what's the gap between where they are and where I am, and how can I close that gap by becoming better, becoming more consistent, and implementing more strategies.
So obviously, understanding your journey of going to community college, going to the larger university, not really being your thing, and leaving, but obviously having all of the success, right? Especially from a digital and media perspective. I would ask you, what is your thoughts on college, on higher education, and is it necessarily necessary?
I think we have very clear evidence that college is not necessary, but education is. Education, commitment, discipline is, because even when I dropped out of college, I was still focused on refining my craft and becoming better, and I would spend 12 hours a day studying. It's just that I wasn't doing it in a college capacity. And so I think education is key. It just doesn't have to be packaged into college, which is what college is. It's just packaged education. They marketed college and branded it very well for so many years, but now we're starting to see that it's not the only path, and for many people, it's not the best path.
Yeah, I like to tell people, I'm like, all of the books that you're required to read in a college course, you can just go get those books and read them yourself and not spend $30,000.
Right, and not spend 4 years. You can read what you need to read actually in 6 months and get rid of all the electives.
Yeah, for real.